I was motivated to join the military because my family has a long-standing military tradition. My father, grandfather, and great-grandfather were all in the Navy. Uh, my older brother and I were in the Marine Corps, and my younger brother was in the Navy as well. So military has just been a part of my life for as long as I can remember. My primary job was O-351 anti-tank assaultman. We did work with demolitions and rockets and all around getting into places that people didn't want us to get into. The majority of my time was served at Camp Pendleton in California. A lot of my time off was spent up in LA and down in San Diego. I met a lot of famous people just bumping into them on the street, but the most special to me was a USO show when I was deployed to Iraq. I got to meet Robin Williams, Kid Rock, Lance Armstrong, and Lewis Black. And Robin Williams had been a hero of mine since I was a child, playing Genie in Aladdin. So getting to meet him was really awesome.
Well, I think that, like a lot of our students, I was looking for something, a way to improve my situation. And I knew that I could go into the military because when I was in high school, some of my friends took the ASVAB. And so I took it just because they were taking it. But as it turned out, I scored high enough that a recruiter started calling, and so I knew that that was always an option. As it turned out, my mom wouldn't sign for me to join when I was 17. She said that you have to be 18 and make that decision for yourself. And so I kind of kept it in the back of my head, and really, I mean, when things got that bad, when things got bad enough that 3 meals a day and a rack to sleep on was a big improvement in my life, I took that option. So after training, I went through a lot of training to become a field radio repairman. And so I was trained to troubleshoot radios all the way down to the littlest components, the diodes and the resistors and whatnot. But then my actual job was to take radios from radio operators and give it to the people who troubleshot down to that component. And sometimes it was turn it on and give it back to the operator. You've got to turn it on. But a lot of times there really was a problem, and we needed to determine where was the problem. Is the problem in the handset? Is the problem in this radio? Is it in the antenna? Where is it? And so that was my major job, and for the most part, I did that attached to an AAV unit, which is Assault Amphibious Vehicles, which are sort of like a tank that drives off the back of a ship and into the water and then comes up on the shore and lets out the infantry. If you've seen Saving Private Ryan, you've seen a version of those. They now have hatches on the top as well as the outside. My service really split up into 3 different segments. There was one which was just sort of a catch-all. That was boot camp and MCT and that kind of stuff. Then for a year I spent training to become a field radio repairman in 29 Palms, California, which is also where they send people to train for Afghanistan and Iraq. It's a severe desert environment, and tanks are out there. But I was there for a year to train to be a radio repairman. And then I was stationed after that. I got very lucky. I was first squad leader, and the guide and the platoon sergeant were given orders to Hawaii, to Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii. And the sergeant couldn't take them, so as first squad leader, I got to take those orders. And so I was stationed for 2.5 years on Kaneohe Bay, Hawaii, but for a year of that, I was doing 6-month tours of Asia attached to that AAV unit. It was a really beautiful duty station. There was a lot of really cool things about it, but I didn't get to spend as much time there as what shows up on paper. It's important to preface this with the fact that I served under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So this was a rule that said that people could serve in the military who were gay as long as they didn't ever get caught being gay. And as long as nobody asked them and nobody told, then it was okay. And I just mention that because the one person who most influenced me in the military is also somebody that I jokingly say is the gayest Marine ever to serve under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And we called him Staff Sergeant GG, which was his initials. And he took me aside one day because I had been called out to call cadence, and I didn't do a very good job of it. And he was giving me these just very decent pointers, use a song that other people know, try to sing to a rhythm. He was giving me good pointers. And I was frustrated when he left, and I kind of just yelled. And I ran into him later, and I was just sort of gushing this apology. I'm sorry, Staff Sergeant, I respect you. I didn't mean to disrespect you, blah, 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 blah. And he said, don't apologize, just don't do it. And I thought, what a jerk. And about 2 years later, I thought, what a brilliant man. He really had his finger on the pulse of something there. I was so good at apologizing that I didn't worry about living in such a way that I didn't need to apologize. And so he was probably the biggest influence on me of all of my time in the military.
I decided to join the military through ROTC at K-State. I had been at K-State a semester after transferring from Cloud County Community College and was really struggling to pay for tuition, pay my room and board, and I was working full-time while going to school full-time. So I had a friend of mine that was involved in ROTC, and he convinced me just to go over and talk to one of the officers that was assigned to the detachment there at K-State and just look into it. So I did. I went over and decided that second semester at K-State I would enroll in a 1 credit hour ROTC leadership course, which I did. That summer, then, I was told, well, if you want to continue in ROTC, you have to go to field training. And so I still hadn't signed the dotted line at that point, but I decided to see if I could get through field training. So the first week of July, I reported to McConnell Air Force Base and went through field training there. I was the only cadet at that field training from Kansas, and as you know, Kansas in July is a pretty hot time of year to be going through field training. Had a 6-week field training course, came back and basically had about 2 days to decide if I was going to sign the dotted line and commit myself to going into the U.S. Air Force. And they offered me a books and tuition scholarship to finish my degree at K-State. And so I went ahead and accepted that scholarship, and that was when I basically committed to going into the Air Force. Well, I just kind of mentioned field training. They call it field training for officers in the Air Force. It was 6 weeks, the typical running, the different exercises that you go through, the leadership training. It also was about teaching the cadets how to wear the uniform, how to participate in military parades, all of those kind of things. So I went to a mixed field training, meaning that there were both men and women there. There were about probably 275 cadets at the field training session that I went to. In my flight, there were 22 individuals, 18 men and 4 women in my flight. We lived in the old World War II barracks that were at McConnell, which have since been torn down. And the women had the very first room at the top of the stairs, and the guys had the rest of the rooms down the hall. We shared the same bathrooms. We had to work as a team. It was a good experience overall. Something I don't want to do again, but I'm very thankful that I did and learned a lot about myself. Well, I graduated from K-State and I went on active duty in January of 1988. And my first assignment was to the Los Angeles Air Force Base, working on the space program. It was shortly after the Challenger accident, and so most of the space missions had been grounded due to the shuttle going down, and the Air Force had a number of satellite constellations that they had planned to put up in space on the shuttle. And so we were scrambling to bring back into production the expendable launch vehicles. So I was assigned to work on the Delta II program, the Atlas II program, and the Advanced Launch System program at the time. I did all budget responsibilities as well as cost analysis anytime we had an engineering change order. So those were the programs I worked on. Learned a lot very, very quickly, and from there, from the Los Angeles Air Force Base, I got married about a year after going on active duty, and my husband was assigned to Castle Air Force Base, which is in Central California, and so I worked to get a joint assignment to Castle. Took me about a year to get that assignment, but I transferred there and was chief of the cost analysis branch under the comptroller. So in that role, I served as the base cost analysis officer that anytime the Air Force buys anything from weapon systems to washing machines for the dorms, there has to be a cost analysis done. So that was my responsibility. Also oversaw the economic impact statement that each Air Force base publishes each year to show the impact on the local community. And it happened that my second year at Castle, Castle came out on the base closure list. So I got to present that information many, many times to the local community up until the point where Congress made the decision to go ahead and close Castle Air Force Base. And so again, had a great experience, learned a lot. Some of my favorite memories are both at Los Angeles and also at Castle as it pertains to the military. I did 2 years in Los Angeles and 2 years at Castle Air Force Base. And then Castle was on the base closure list. My husband's squadron was being deactivated, one of the early ones, and so I decided at that point to get out of the Air Force. And we were then transferred to McConnell Air Force Base, where my husband spent a number of years. Went from there to Altus Air Force Base and then back to McConnell Air Force Base. So those were the bases that I have been affiliated with. The first two were active duty and then later as a dependent. Well, there are some lifelong friends that I made in the Air Force and also some people that I consider mentors or role models for me. One in particular was a colonel at the Los Angeles Air Force Base that I looked up to. He was a former missileer, had sat at a missile silo for a considerable amount of his time. He was an engineer, and he helped us like I said, bring the expendable launch vehicles back into production, both at McDonnell Douglas, General Dynamics, Boeing. As the Air Force scrambled to put satellites into space on expendable vehicles, his experience as a missileer, he was an engineer, we ended up using a lot of the missiles that were coming out of the silos at the time. We removed the warhead, the nuclear warhead, and replaced those with a fairing in which the satellite would basically ride in until it got to its orbit in space. So he was one of the major engineers and program managers that I have a fond spot in my heart for having been a great mentor for me. And there are a number of other people, but you know, I feel like he's one that kind of took me under his wing and helped me get my assignment to Castle so I could join my husband on my going away picture that everybody signed. He even wrote, "Get it right, Winningham, or I'll come back and I'll come get you," or something, you know, funny thing. He was a great guy. He's passed away now, but wonderful, wonderful officer. For me, I learned a great deal about myself as a person and what I was capable of doing. I think it also helped me become more patriotic and more appreciative of the freedoms that we have in America. I was on active duty during Desert Storm and knew 2 individuals that did not come home from Desert Storm. And I always hope that for every life that is sacrificed for the United States, that those lives aren't given in vain. And I think, personally, I think serving in the military helps a person grow up. It helps a person know what they're capable of doing. It teaches them respect and appreciation that many other professions don't necessarily have the same impact on. I am very, very grateful that was able to serve and know many, many veterans and understand the sacrifices that not only the veteran themselves makes, but their family makes. So I feel like that's the biggest impact on my perspective in the world.
After about my sophomore year of college, I was undecided on what to major in, and I had always had a desire to be part of the United States military, and I chose the Air Force. And I just left school after my sophomore year and joined, and I continued to take classes, and I thought the GI Bill was a motivating factor for me, and travel. And I was very, very happy with the decision I made when I was 20 years old. I spent the first 2 years in the United States training in Texas, Arizona, Eastern Washington and Spokane, and then the second 2 years I spent in Germany, in southern Germany. I could not have chosen a better place. I just chose Europe, and we had a lot of bases in Germany in 1990, and that's where I ended up. It was wonderful. I had the opportunity to go to Austria, Switzerland, Spain, France, England on short weekends. It was incredible to experience other cultures. I feel that from age 20 to 24, spending those 4 years in the Air Force, I learned to be self-reliant, independent, take care of my own finances, and live at a moment's notice, just a few months in one place, and to continually move. So I learned to adapt, and I learned to make friends with your coworkers, become your family, and to be proud and to be part of a team. It really gave me a great start in those early years in my 20s to lead a happy life. I'm happy that I served.
It was the 2001 9/11 attacks. I remember I was in 5th grade, and we all got, the teacher called us to tell us what was going on. We got sent home early. My dad was a Vietnam vet, and it just struck a part of me to join the military. So I joined the Army at 17. Boot camp is definitely a mental test. There are physical portions as well, of course, but it's mainly mental. The drill sergeants will try to break you down, in the Army at least. It was 12 weeks long for me, and all I did was run. I'm most honored to receive the Army Commendation Medal for giving life-saving techniques, or CPR, to a local while in Afghanistan. He was driving a vehicle, and I noticed he was passed out at the wheel, so I just pulled him out. I stopped the vehicle, pulled him out of the vehicle, and gave him CPR. I think my favorite person I ever met was, he was a Singaporean Army. He was in the Singaporean Army, and he was a Master Sergeant, same rank as E8 in our Army, but he didn't know English at all. And then towards the end of our tour, he could speak to me in English, and I knew some Singapore language, but we became best friends, and we're still friends to this day.
It was my sophomore year in high school whenever the attacks on the Twin Towers happened, and the country kind of came together behind that. You know, firefighters and troops and police officers were all doing what they needed to do to keep the country safe, and it was a big sense of patriotism during that time frame. So whenever the recruiter came to my school, I didn't really have a plan for the future. I didn't plan on going to college or anything, so I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. But I did still have kind of that patriotic feeling from 9/11, and we were still doing the Operation Iraqi Freedom and everything. So I thought, you know, why not join the military, get away from town, kind of learn a trade, get college paid for. So that's what I did. And a year later, I was Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. I spent most of my time served at Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri. Spent about 10 years there, 6 years active and 4 years full-time guard. And lived in a little town called Warrensburg, just outside of Whiteman. Have a lot of fond memories of that place. Me and my friends used to hang out at the pool hall there, and kind of go to the clubs, and did a little motocross riding around town there. It's a lot of fun. Oh man, I met so many great people when I was in the military. My best friend Sean, who actually lives here at Wichita, he got me my job at Spirit. We met and were roommates for about 2 years before he PCS'd out of there and came back here to Wichita. My best friend Adam, who lives in North Carolina right now, he's still in the military actually. He's coming up on his 20th year. Met a lot of people who I still talk to this day on Facebook. Some of them I still go visit. But we actually, me and Sean, my friend who's in the Air Force, we went to North Carolina just last month actually to go see our other friend Adam, who was in the military with us at Whiteman, and we went to a concert together. So just met a lot of great people, made a lot of great friends, a lot of great memories.
Well, from a young age, I was brought up into it because my dad, he was in the Marine Corps, and so he really instilled a lot of the values. My time in boot camp, 1986. I was a junior. I was in between my junior and senior year of high school, and so I'd never been really. I think I'd traveled outside the state of Kansas one time, and so I went to Fort Benning, Georgia, and then just the, you know, when you became immersed into basic training and how they were yelling and directing you, and just really, it was very, very intimidating. Because I was 17 years old, and these guys are doing this. But my dad had told me something from the very beginning. He said, and it holds true to this day, he said, listen to what they say, not how they say it. And I mean, I've pretty much dealt with that from here on out. I mean, or from that time until now, and I instilled that in my kids as well. The majority of my time was spent would be in Kansas. I mean, I spent 10 years in the Kansas Army National Guard, and so I spent most of my time there in Kansas doing stuff like that. And then right after 9/11, I was stationed in Aberdeen, Maryland for just shy of a year. At that time, the towers were still smoking. And so, I mean, it was very solemn time. And I mean, you know, when you went there, I mean, you really paid attention a lot more than you ever would have, because you didn't know where you'd be going from there. And then from there, let's see, I think I spent a combined total of 23 months over in Iraq. That would be my second one. I was in southwest Baghdad for 15, and then I was south of Baghdad for 8 months. You know, it hits every facet of my life. I mean, you could ask my daughters, I mean, they'll tell you, and one of my daughters who's a teacher, I mean, you know, and she still does it to this point. It's called the knife hand. When you're explaining something, you're going like this and not like this, because anytime you go like this, you got 3 others pointing right back at you. So, you know, that's one way. The other one is with the discipline and how I look at things in my life and how I deal with certain situations, because you don't, in the military, especially overseas in a combat zone, you don't have the luxury to be able to think about some of the things. You just have to rely on your training that you've had and how you've been taught how to react to certain things. I would say for me it was, I received the Bronze Star just after coming back from Iraq, and I had commanded a unit of 377 soldiers and brought everybody back. I mean, everybody came back, everybody was alive, everybody had all their digits. I mean, so that was probably the one where I was awarded that. It meant the most to me.
I was working a dead-end retail job in Wisconsin. And I really wanted to go to college, and I couldn't afford it. I was also tired of working my retail job, so I went to the recruiter's office and said I wanted to join active duty Air Force. My first job was I was a aircraft engine mechanic, so aircraft maintenance, and you know, I picked that job because I like working with my hands. I quickly realized that Air Force maintenance was probably not going to be a good long-term plan for me. I was working on cargo planes, and I would see the crews come back from overseas or whatnot, and they'd be bringing back cases of beer from Germany, and they'd be having a good time laughing, and I was stuck in the weather working on their broke jet. I said, you know, I want to wear that flight suit, and so as soon as I could, I cross-trained and I became an aircraft loadmaster. And being a loadmaster, you're responsible for loading cargo, passengers, doing center of gravity, doing airdrops. And I started out as a C-130 loadmaster at Little Rock. And my first few flights, you know, we did airdrops, but we were also doing low levels and combat maneuvers. So I got sick a lot, but flight full of puking on the C-130 was better than being on the ground on the flight line turning wrenches. Flying was definitely fun. And then I moved to Charleston, South Carolina, and became a loadmaster on the C-17, which is a bigger plane. And that was a good 2 years. I saw the world, went to a lot of nice places, went to a few not so nice places, but that's the job. And then I was picked to become a in-flight refueling specialist, aka boom operator, here at McConnell Air Force Base. So I trained on that, moved here to Kansas, did that job for a few years, and at about my 12-year mark, I got out. So I did a year in Korea working on F-16 fighter jets, and we had the section chief. His name was Chief Wakefield. He was a pretty special guy. The chief is the highest rank an enlisted man can have in the Air Force, and a lot of, you know, the chief, that's the code for chief is E9. Enlisted ranks are E1 through E9. So Chief Wakefield was at the top. And he was actually a good chief. He cared for his people. You know, we were working hard. We worked a lot of weekends. He'd be there on the weekends too. Man led by example. Helped us all get the job done. Made sure we were all appreciated. And another special guy, worked with. The KC-135 pilot. I deployed with him. His name is Chris Mantle. He's a pretty good pilot. One time we were flying at about 8,000 feet above ground level around the mountains of Afghanistan, about to hit our refueling track. And we had all our routes and turns programmed into the flight computer. And so the plane did a pre-programmed turn. I was walking to the back to the refueling pod to start getting set up for the refuel, and so the plane banked for the turn, and it just kept on banking. And I thought, this is a really steep bank, and I heard Mantle yell, and I assumed he grabbed the stick and kicked off the autopilot, because very quickly the plane leveled out. And so as soon as I could get back on headset, I asked what happened, and he's like, our autopilot tried to roll us. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's a good thing you caught that, you know. We're in the mountains. We roll too steep, probably can't recover. We don't have a lot of room, and yeah. So he was a good pilot. He always looked out for us. One more person I can think of is my last commander, Lieutenant Colonel Wes Spurlock. He knew I was getting out, and he made sure me and my family were set up for the best. And yeah, I was prepared for getting out. I had a good plan, you know, going to school, use my GI Bill. Yeah, he helped me out a lot.
I joined the military 7 years after 9/11. And to be quite honest with you, the reason why I joined was I was a little bit burnt out on going to college, and at the time we were still at war. I believe it was Operation Iraqi Freedom, and you know, the recruiter I talked to, he was explaining to me how joining the military would prevent me from having to pay for my own school, which at the time I was working 2 jobs to do so. So the military seemed like a good opportunity. My time in boot camp was an experience, to say the least. If you can believe this or not, I was one of the people who wanted to hang on to my own individuality, and boot camp was all about losing yourself and just coming together, you know, to accomplish the mission. You know, one team, one fight is a bit of a cliche, but that's truly what the Navy was about. And so initially it was hard for me because I was stubborn and young, but by the end of it, I was able to understand, you know, what they were trying to get me to do, and to really see the bigger picture. I served a majority of my time on board the CVN 72 Abraham Lincoln. That was a carrier. Did two tours in the 5th Fleet on it. You know, our job was really to fly off the planes, who would go, you know, offer ground support and you know, do the top secret missions that not a lot of people back here in the United States get to hear about or know about. Being in the military was the best thing for my life. I joined when I was 22 years old. Didn't really understand the concept of you know, self-discipline and the importance of taking care of your priorities and handling your business first. But now, you know, after going through that for 4 years, I'm able to just take care of my responsibilities, and I still have fun, but I definitely get my work done first. Joining the military enabled me to go back to school, and when I went back to school after, once I got discharged, I was able to completely focus on my studies, and I was also able to volunteer at the University of Kansas as kind of like a a volunteer film / manager for them. And that's really what laid the foundation for me getting into coaching. You know, having a place like that on your resume opened up a ton of doors for me, and been coaching for the last